At 10:30 hours on October 27, 1943, New Zealand infantry hit the beaches of Mono Island in the Treasury Islands. The landing force totaled 3,795 men in the initial assault wave. American destroyers Phillip and Pringle laid down pre-landing bombardment as heavy rain reduced visibility. Japanese defenders, though expecting continued Allied advances up the Solomon Islands chain, were caught off guard by the timing and precise location of the landing. Among the first Americans ashore were members of Company A, 87th Naval Construction Battalion, Seabees, along with a 25-man detachment from battalion headquarters. They brought equipment that would permanently change the nature of Pacific Island warfare. They brought bulldozers. Caterpillar D8s, massive tracked machines weighing roughly 15 to 20 tons, equipped with 10-foot steel blades designed to move earth, clear jungle, and build roads. Painted olive drab, manufactured in Peoria, Illinois and San Leandro, California, then shipped more than 7,000 miles across the Pacific Ocean to operate on a remote tropical island most Americans had never heard of. The Seabees started the engines. Diesel exhaust mixed with salt spray and tropical humidity. The sound of heavy machinery echoed across terrain where only days earlier the jungle had known nothing louder than insects and birds. Japanese defenders retreating inland could hear the machines at work. Many had never heard bulldozers operating at this scale. 1 hour after the initial landing, an incident occurred that would become legendary within the naval construction battalions. Machinist's mate second class Aurelio Tassin of Milford, Massachusetts, was driving his bulldozer off the landing craft when his commanding officer, Lieutenant Charles Turnbull, informed him that a Japanese pillbox was holding up the advance. The fortification, constructed of coconut logs and sand in standard Japanese defensive style, covered the beach with a machine gun and pinned down both New Zealand and American troops. The advance had stalled. Tassin made a decision. He raised the bulldozer blade to use it as a shield against incoming fire, maneuvered around the pillbox, and approached from the rear. Bullets rattled harmlessly off the steel blade as Lieutenant Turnbull provided covering fire with his carbine. When Tassin reached the position, he dropped the blade and drove straight through the fortification, crushing it completely and burying its 12 Japanese occupants under tons of logs, sand, and coral. The entire action took minutes. The beach obstacle was eliminated. The advance resumed. For this action, Aurelio Tassin was awarded the Silver Star and promoted to machinist's mate first class. His exploit appeared in military publications, was illustrated in wartime comics, and inspired a climactic scene in the 1944 film The Fighting Seabees, starring John Wayne. The image of a Seabee astride his bulldozer, simultaneously fighting and building, became an enduring symbol of Naval Construction Battalion operations. But individual heroism, dramatic as it was, represented only a fraction of what bulldozers accomplished in the Pacific War. The real story was not drama. The real story was mathematics. Construction speed. Industrial capacity translated into strategic advantage. On the Treasury Islands, Seabee bulldozers never stopped working. Jungle was cleared for supply dumps. Secure areas for ammunition, food, medical facilities, and equipment storage were established within hours of the landing. Within days, Seabees had constructed 21 miles of roads across Mono and Sterling Islands. A PT boat base was established on Sterling. Work began on an airfield 5,600 feet long and 100 feet wide, complete with taxiways, aviation hardstands, and an aviation gasoline storage farm of 5 tanks, each holding 1,000 barrels. The remainder of the 87th Naval Construction Battalion arrived on November 28 and joined the effort. They were relieved by the 82nd Battalion in December, followed by the arrival of the 88th Battalion in January 1944. By that point, the airfield had been extended to 7,000 feet long and 300 feet wide, fully capable of supporting heavy bomber operations. In approximately 2 months, the Treasury Islands were transformed from undeveloped jungle into a major forward air base. This construction timeline represented a fundamental shift in Pacific War logistics. American forces could seize an island and make it operationally useful within days or weeks. Japanese forces, relying primarily on manual labor, required months to accomplish similar projects. The time differential created cascading strategic advantages. Faster base construction enabled faster operational tempo. Faster tempo left Japanese garrisons less time to prepare defenses. Weaker defenses meant quicker American victories. Quicker victories meant shorter campaigns. Shorter campaigns meant fewer casualties and reduced resource expenditure. The cycle compounded with every operation. Bulldozers made that possible. Fleet Admiral Halsey, commander of major South Pacific operations throughout the Solomon Campaign, understood this clearly. After the war, when asked which weapons won the Pacific War, his answer was precise. If I had to give credit to the instruments and machines that won us the war in the Pacific, I would rate them in this order: submarines first, radar second, planes third, bulldozers fourth. Halsey ranked bulldozers above battleships, aircraft carriers, cruisers, and destroyers, above every surface combatant in the U.S. Navy. His assessment came from an admiral who commanded carrier task forces, directed surface engagements, and oversaw amphibious assaults from Guadalcanal through the Philippines to the doorstep of Japan itself. He had watched Seabees build bases faster than the enemy could destroy them. The Caterpillar D-8 used throughout Pacific operations existed in several wartime variants. Pre-war models, produced from 1935 to 1941, featured engines producing approximately 110 horsepower. Roughly 8,000 were manufactured before wartime priorities shifted production. With American entry into the war, Caterpillar introduced the D8-8R series, specifically designed for military use. The design was simplified to conserve strategic materials and accelerate production. Non-essential civilian features were eliminated, but performance improved. Engine output increased to approximately 130 horsepower through improved fuel injection. The 6-speed transmission was retained. Operating weight increased slightly to about 15.5 tons. Between 1941 and 1945, Caterpillar produced approximately 9,900 D8-8R bulldozers, most destined directly for military service, many shipped to the Pacific. After the war, surplus bulldozers were sold off. Contractors in Australia, New Zealand, and across the Pacific purchased former combat machines that had once built airfields under fire. They kept working, just as they always had.
These surplus military machines, identifiable by distinctive serial number markings such as US-7, indicating United States Navy 7th Fleet Service in the Pacific, proved remarkably durable. Many transitioned directly from combat zones into civilian construction, where they operated reliably for years, sometimes decades after their military service ended in 1945. Anticipating enormous post-war construction demand, Caterpillar introduced the D8 2U series, incorporating substantial improvements over wartime models. Engine output increased to approximately 148 horsepower. A new 5-speed constant mesh transmission featured a forward-reverse lever, reducing the number of gear changes required during typical work cycles. An oil clutch system, a major innovation, dramatically extended clutch life and improved cooling under sustained heavy loads. Operating weight increased to roughly 16.25 tons. The 2U series proved extremely popular in post-war markets, with thousands manufactured through the late 1940s. Yet the wartime 8R series holds unique historical significance. Painted in olive drab, marked with U.S. military identification, and operated by Seabees under combat conditions across the Pacific, these machines represented American industrial capacity translated directly into operational military power. They demonstrated a fundamental truth of modern warfare. Victory depends not only on weapons, but on industrial production, logistics, infrastructure, and the ability to build faster than an enemy can destroy. One Caterpillar D8, operated by a skilled Seabee, could move approximately 300 cubic meters of earth per hour under favorable conditions. This figure comes from official Seabee engineering estimates and post-war construction analyses. 300 cubic meters equals roughly 11,000 cubic feet of material. Moving the same volume using only hand tools would require approximately 300 laborers working an entire day. The productivity ratio was therefore roughly 300 to 1. One American operator with a bulldozer could accomplish in a single hour what 300 men with shovels could achieve in a full day. The figure varied to terrain and conditions, but it appears consistently across wartime engineering studies and historical accounts as a reasonable approximation of the industrial advantage American construction equipment provided. Japanese forces possessed no equivalent capability. The Imperial Japanese Navy organized construction units known as setsueitai. Beginning in late 1941, these units consisted largely of Korean and Taiwanese laborers under Japanese officers and civilian supervisors. Despite determined effort, they never achieved more than a fraction of Seabee capability. Japanese commanders routinely assigned these units tasks that required heavy machinery, but the machinery simply did not exist. Japan's wartime industrial capacity focused overwhelmingly on aircraft, ships, and weapons. Construction equipment received low priority in resource allocation and manufacturing schedules. The few bulldozers and tractors available were typically civilian models requisitioned from plantations or commercial enterprises, poorly maintained, lacking spare parts, and prone to breakdown under continuous use. Post-war academic analyses document this gap clearly. Japanese engineering resources proved tragically inadequate once war began. Bulldozers and heavy earth-moving equipment were almost entirely absent due to severe shortages. Engineer units compensated by assigning ever larger numbers of labor troops, often Koreans occupying the lowest positions in the military hierarchy. Human muscle was systematically substituted for machinery. The substitution failed. Japanese construction units dug trenches by hand, hauled materials manually, cleared jungle with axes and machetes, and built fortifications log by log. Progress was slow, exhausting, and fundamentally incapable of matching mechanized output. Projects that Seabees completed in days required weeks or months of Japanese labor. This time gap proved decisive. On Guadalcanal, Japanese forces labored for months attempting to complete Henderson Field before American Marines landed in August 1942. The airfield was barely functional when captured. The 6th Naval Construction Battalion, landing with the Marines, rendered Henderson operational for American fighters within days, despite continued Japanese bombardment. The speed stunned Japanese commanders, who had devoted vastly more time to the same task with inferior results. On Espiritu Santo, Seabees carved a complete 6,000-foot airstrip from virgin jungle in just 20 days, enabling sustained air operations in support of Guadalcanal. Nearby Japanese forces were still struggling with incomplete construction projects weeks later. On Vangunu Island in the New Georgia Group, the 47th Naval Construction Battalion landed with Marines on June 30, 1943. By mid-afternoon the same day, construction of a fighter airstrip began. Hills were blasted and bulldozed, ravines filled with crushed coral. 9 days later, the first American aircraft landed. By July 18th, less than 3 weeks after the assault, a fully operational 3,300-foot runway supported an entire fighter squadron. Japanese defenders were still laboring to complete their fortifications. On Tarawa Atoll in November 1943, one of the Pacific War's bloodiest battles ended after 3 days of brutal fighting. Nearly 1,000 Marines were killed. Yet Seabees landing with the assault forces had the shattered Japanese airfield operational within 15 hours of the island being secured. 15 hours from combat cessation to operational airfield. On Saipan, invaded on June 15, 1944, Marines captured the island's principal Japanese airfield. Seabees began repairs immediately, often under fire, filling bomb craters, clearing debris, compacting surfaces, and halting only when forced to repel counterattacks. The airfield was operational within 4 days. American aircraft flew combat missions from Saipan less than a week after the landing. Within weeks, B-29 Superfortress bombers were operating from the island, striking targets across the Philippines and soon the Japanese home islands. The pattern repeated across the Pacific. American forces did not merely defeat Japanese garrisons, they outbuilt them. And in the Pacific War, the Bulldozer proved as decisive as any weapon.
This pattern of extremely rapid construction following combat operations repeated throughout the Pacific Campaign with remarkable consistency. Each major operation followed the same fundamental sequence and produced similar construction timelines. At Kwajalein Atoll in the Marshall Islands, American forces landed on January 31, 1944. The assault required complex coordination across multiple islands within the atoll. Seabees accompanied the assault waves. Within days of securing key positions, construction battalions established functional airfield facilities and port operations. Kwajalein rapidly transformed into a major fleet anchorage and aviation base, supporting operations deeper into Japanese-held territory. At Eniwetok Atoll
Captured in February 1944, Seabees again demonstrated extraordinary construction speed. Despite the atoll's remote location and minimal existing infrastructure, American construction forces created complete base facilities within weeks. The pattern repeated: rapid seizure followed by rapid transformation. American forces could project power across vast Pacific distances largely because they could rapidly build the infrastructure required to sustain continued operations. On Guam, combat began on July 21, 1944, when the 3rd Marine Division and 1st Provisional Marine Brigade came ashore. The 25th Naval Construction Battalion and the 2nd Special Naval Construction Battalion landed with the assault forces. Seabees immediately began critical stevedoring operations, unloading supplies and heavy equipment directly onto contested beaches while combat continued inland. During 3 weeks of intense fighting, Seabees worked continuously. After the island was secured, the pace of construction accelerated dramatically. Guam was transformed into an advanced headquarters of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, a major air base for B-29 strategic bombers, and a vast logistics hub supporting operations across the Western Pacific. The 5th Naval Construction Brigade, activated specifically for Guam's development, oversaw construction of massive port facilities at Opera Harbor, extensive road networks, multiple airfield complexes, and comprehensive base infrastructure. 2 complete B-29 bomber airfields, North Field and Northwest Field, were constructed by U.S. Army engineer battalions working alongside Navy Seabees. North Field became operational on February 3, 1945, launching its first B-29 raid against Japan on February 24. Northwest Field's South Runway became operational on June 1, followed by the North Runway on July 1. The scale and speed of construction on Guam represented one of the greatest engineering achievements of the entire Pacific War. On Peleliu, one of the most brutal battles of the Pacific Campaign raged from September through November 1944. American casualties were extraordinarily high relative to the island's size. Yet even during prolonged combat against Japanese defenders entrenched in elaborate cave systems, CB construction continued. Bulldozers worked under fire. Roads were built connecting forward positions. Airfield facilities were expanded despite ongoing combat. Construction proceeded because operational necessity demanded it, regardless of tactical conditions. Each island assault demonstrated the same operational sequence. American naval and air forces established sea and air superiority through preparatory bombardment. Amphibious forces assaulted defended positions. Marine or Army infantry secured beachheads and advanced inland. Seabees, often landing with the first assault waves, immediately began infrastructure development. Bulldozers cleared beach obstacles. Supply dumps were organized. Roads connected beaches to inland positions. Airfield construction began even while fighting continued. Ports were repaired or built from scratch. Each captured island was systematically transformed into a base supporting the next advance. Japanese defensive strategy evolved in response, but no effective counter emerged. Initially, Japanese forces emphasized beach defense to prevent landings altogether. This failed as overwhelming naval gunfire and air power systematically destroyed coastal fortifications. Japanese commanders then shifted to defense-in-depth strategies, withdrawing inland to contest American advances after successful landings. This too failed, under American firepower, mobility, and close air support. By mid-1944, Japanese strategy increasingly emphasized underground defense, elaborate tunnel systems, and fortified caves. If Japan could not outbuild American construction capability, perhaps it could impose casualties so severe that American political will would collapse. This thinking led directly to battles such as Iwo Jima and Okinawa, where Japanese forces fought almost entirely from subterranean positions, seeking to maximize American losses for every yard of ground. Even these defenses revealed critical limitations when confronted by bulldozers and determined engineering effort. Once cave positions were identified through reconnaissance or captured intelligence, bulldozers sealed entrances with earth, coral, and debris, neutralizing defensive positions without costly direct assaults. After fortifications were shattered by naval bombardment, aerial bombing, artillery fire, explosives, or flamethrowers, bulldozers rapidly cleared rubble to maintain road access and operational mobility. The machines adapted to every tactical environment. They built roads to sustain supply lines. They constructed defensive works protecting American troops during consolidation. They created airfields on islands specifically fortified to prevent their construction. On Iwo Jima, combat lasted from February 19th through March 26, 1945. Japanese defenders under General Tadamichi Kuribayashi had prepared extraordinarily complex underground defenses over many months. Interconnected tunnels, reinforced caves, and heavily fortified bunkers honeycombing the island. Yet even as desperate combat continued, Seabees landed bulldozers and worked under fire. Roads were carved from volcanic ash. Airfield facilities were prepared. Japanese forces had spent months preparing Iwo Jima's defenses. American bulldozers were simultaneously transforming the island into a strategic air base. This productivity advantage produced consequences far beyond construction speed. Faster base development meant higher American operational tempo. Each successful landing led rapidly to the next operation. Japanese forces had less time to prepare defenses, less time to reinforce threatened positions, and less time to adapt strategically. The pace of American advances accelerated markedly throughout 1944 and 1945, enabled in no small part by CB construction capabilities. Some Japanese commanders and intelligence analysts recognized what American construction equipment represented in strategic terms. They understood that the bulldozer was not merely a machine, it was a force multiplier that no amount of courage or sacrifice could counter.
The cumulative effects of these factors reshaped the Pacific War at every level: tactical, operational, and strategic. American victories were not simply the result of battlefield success. They were the product of a system that transformed combat gains into permanent advantages with extraordinary speed. Each captured island became more than a conquered objective. It became an irreversible stepping stone. Once Seabees completed their work, Japanese forces could not reclaim what had been built. Airfields enabled continuous fighter coverage and bomber operations. Ports allowed the arrival of additional troops, artillery, fuel, and supplies. Roads ensured mobility across terrain that had previously been nearly impassable. Hospitals reduced mortality rates and returned wounded soldiers to duty more quickly. Communication facilities integrated isolated outposts into a unified operational network. Japanese forces understood this transformation but could not stop it.
Captured Japanese documents repeatedly expressed frustration at the speed with which Americans turned useless islands into powerful bases. Intelligence summaries noted that American construction followed landings so rapidly that Japanese defenders often found themselves under air attack from newly built airfields before defensive preparations were complete. The psychological effect was profound. Japanese troops retreating inland could hear bulldozers working day and night. The noise was relentless. It signaled permanence. It meant the Americans were not merely passing through, they were staying. Every engine sound represented another layer of infrastructure that Japanese forces lacked the capacity to destroy. This awareness undermined morale. Japanese defensive doctrine emphasized sacrifice, endurance, and willingness to fight to the death. But endurance alone could not counter bulldozers, aircraft, and logistics operating in an integrated system. No amount of bravery could fill a bomb crater faster than a Caterpillar D8. No human labor could match the output of mechanized construction sustained by a continental-scale industrial base. By late 1944, the disparity had become absolute. American forces no longer paused for extended consolidation. They moved from island to island with accelerating tempo. CB construction ensured that each new base came online faster than the last. Japanese commanders lost the ability to predict where the next blow would fall, or to prepare adequately when it did. This acceleration shortened the war. Faster construction meant fewer prolonged campaigns. Fewer prolonged campaigns meant fewer casualties on both sides. It reduced the time Japanese civilians and soldiers spent under blockade, bombardment, and deprivation. It compressed the duration of the conflict, even as its intensity increased. In this sense, bulldozers were not instruments of destruction alone. They were instruments of conclusion. They turned temporary tactical success into irreversible strategic reality. Once an American airfield was operational, Japanese resistance on that island became irrelevant in broader terms. The war moved on, leaving isolated garrisons behind to wither without supplies, reinforcement, or hope of relief. This pattern culminated in the Marianas. With Saipan, Tinian, and Guam transformed into massive air bases, Japan itself fell within direct reach of sustained strategic bombing. The bulldozers that had once cleared jungle on distant atolls now enabled operations that struck the industrial heart of the Japanese Empire. None of this was accidental. It reflected deliberate Japanese planning that understood modern war as a problem of systems, not single battles. Firepower mattered, courage mattered, leadership mattered, but without infrastructure, none of those could be sustained. The Seabees embodied that understanding. They landed with rifles and bulldozers. They fought when necessary and built whenever possible. They transformed chaos into order under fire. Their work rarely produced dramatic headlines, but it shaped every campaign's outcome. Japanese officers who survived the war consistently reached the same conclusion. They had been defeated not just by weapons, but by production, engineering, and time. Time was the one resource Japan could not replace, and the bulldozer ensured America controlled it. By the war's end, many of the same machines that had landed under fire were still operating, grading runways, maintaining roads, supporting occupation forces. After demobilization, they entered civilian life, building highways, dams, and cities across the Pacific and the United States. They kept doing what they had always done,
building faster than anything could tear down. In the Pacific War, the bulldozer was not a supporting tool. It was one of the decisive weapons of victory.
Battalion commanders were typically officers of the Civil Engineer Corps, almost all holding engineering degrees and substantial pre-war construction experience. Company commanders and platoon leaders often had years, sometimes decades, of civilian experience supervising large construction projects before entering military service. The result was a rare combination: disciplined military organization fused with professional civilian construction expertise. This hybrid nature made CB units uniquely effective. It also revealed itself clearly in CB casualty patterns and wartime decorations. CBs faced danger from two distinct sources. The first was enemy action. The second was construction itself. Combat casualties occurred when enemy forces attacked construction sites, when CBs fought as infantry after their positions were overrun, and when CB units conducted direct combat operations in support of Marine and Army formations. In several campaigns, CBs were temporarily reorganized into ad hoc infantry units to reinforce threatened lines. Construction casualties stemmed from the inherently dangerous nature of large-scale engineering under primitive, hostile conditions. Bulldozers overturned on steep slopes, excavations collapsed, explosives detonated prematurely during demolition and clearing operations. Underwater construction led to drowning incidents. Tropical disease, heat exhaustion, and infections compounded risks. Exact casualty figures vary among historical sources, but comprehensive studies indicate that approximately 500 CBs were killed in action or died from combat wounds during World War II. Several thousand more were wounded in combat. Construction accidents and disease killed hundreds more and injured thousands. The combined casualty toll demonstrated that CB service involved genuine danger, often from multiple sources simultaneously. Decoration patterns tell the same story. 33 CBs earned the Silver Star for gallantry in combat. 5 received the Navy Cross, the Navy's second highest award for valor. Hundreds earned Bronze Stars for meritorious service under fire. Thousands received Purple Hearts for wounds sustained in action. Many more were awarded commendations for exceptional construction achievements completed under extreme conditions. CBs did not merely build behind the lines. They fought and built at the same time, exactly as their motto proclaimed. Even in the absence of enemy fire, the work itself was hazardous. Operating heavy machinery in tropical environments on unfamiliar terrain meant constant risk. Bulldozers clearing jungle encountered hidden roots, sinkholes, and unstable coral substrates. Equipment operated without modern safety standards or protective systems. Combat conditions eliminated normal civilian safety practices entirely. Yet, construction continued without pause, because the work was strategically indispensable. By the end of World War II, the scale of CB accomplishment across the Pacific was staggering. Naval construction battalions built or significantly improved more than 400 separate bases of varying size and function. These ranged from small forward supply points and PT boat facilities to massive complexes capable of supporting entire fleets and air forces. CBs constructed or extensively repaired over 100 airfields across the Pacific theater. These varied enormously. Some were simple fighter strips, 3,000 to 4,000 feet long, cut from jungle and surfaced with compacted coral or steel matting.
Others were enormous bomber bases featuring multiple runways over 8,000 feet long, extensive taxiway systems, hundreds of aircraft hard stands, ammunition depots, maintenance hangars, and fuel storage facilities supporting hundreds of heavy bombers. Road construction represented another monumental achievement. Seabees built thousands of miles of roads across dozens of widely scattered islands. These roads connected beaches to inland combat zones, linked airfields to ports, joined supply depots to frontline units, and provided the land transportation network essential for sustained operations. Road building in tropical Pacific environments was extraordinarily difficult. Seasonal rains turned poorly built roads into impassable swamps. Proper grading, drainage, and surfacing were critical. Seabees applied professional engineering techniques developed through experience, cambering, ditching, culvert placement, and crushed coral surfacing to create roads that functioned reliably under heavy military traffic and severe weather. Beyond airfields and roads, Seabees built complete port facilities where none previously existed. Many Pacific islands lacked natural deep-water harbors. Seabees constructed artificial ports using pontoon barges, floating piers, and innovative modular systems. They dredged channels, built breakwaters, installed navigation aids, and created functional ports capable of handling large cargo ships and fleet auxiliaries. Fuel infrastructure was equally critical. Major bases required massive storage capacity for aviation gasoline, diesel fuel, bunker oil, and specialized fuels. Storage volumes measured in millions of gallons. Tank farms required complex piping systems, pumping stations, filtration equipment, and fire protection, constructed rapidly from materials shipped thousands of miles across contested seas. Medical facilities built by Seabees saved countless lives. Field hospitals, fleet hospitals, and base hospitals provided emergency surgery, intensive care, recovery wards, and long-term treatment. The hospital complex on Guam eventually expanded to over 9,000 beds, treating casualties from Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and other late-war battles. These facilities required specialized construction, operating theaters with ventilation and lighting, sterilization systems, water purification, and waste disposal. Seabees also built communications infrastructure, the nervous system of Pacific operations. Radio stations, telephone networks, radar installations, navigation beacons, and control towers coordinated air and naval activity across immense distances. Ammunition bunkers protected explosives from weather and enemy attack. Fresh water systems supplied potable water to islands where natural sources were non-existent or contaminated. Power plants provided electricity for bases operating continuously, day and night. All of this was built under wartime pressure, often under fire, with chronic material shortages and extreme time constraints. The contrast with Japanese construction methods could not have been more stark. Japanese construction units, the setsueitai, relied primarily on manual labor. Large labor gangs, often composed of Korean and Taiwanese conscripts, worked with hand tools under harsh conditions. Skilled supervision was limited. Equipment was scarce. Shovels, picks, axes, and wheelbarrows were the primary tools available. Progress was slow, despite exhausting labor and long hours. Projects that Seabees completed in days required weeks or months of Japanese effort and often remained unfinished when American forces arrived. The productivity gap was not a matter of courage or determination. It was a matter of industrial reality. The Pacific War was not decided solely by battles. It was decided by the ability to turn victory into permanence. and no tool symbolized that ability more clearly than the bulldozer.
When American forces first entered the Pacific, they faced a vast archipelago of remote islands, thick jungle, volcanic rock, coral reefs, and impenetrable mangroves. Each island was a fortress in its own right, defended by seasoned Japanese soldiers, prepared positions, and difficult terrain. Victory required more than firepower. It required infrastructure, and infrastructure required machines. Enter the Seabees. The United States Naval Construction Battalions, composed of professional engineers, construction supervisors, mechanics, and tradesmen, arrived with bulldozers, graders, cranes, and heavy equipment. Men in their 30s and 40s, seasoned in civilian construction, now wore Navy uniforms and rifles. Their mission was dual: fight when necessary, build whenever possible. On October 27, 1943, at Mono Island in the Treasury Islands, New Zealand and American forces landed under heavy rain. Among the first ashore were Seabees of Company A, 87th Naval Construction Battalion. They drove Caterpillar D8 bulldozers off landing craft, engines roaring, diesel smoke mixing with salt spray. One of these men, machinist mate Aurelio Tagson, approached a Japanese pillbox under fire. With technical skill and courage, he used his bulldozer blade as a shield, circled the position, and crushed the fortification along with its defenders. This act of individual heroism, recognized with the Silver Star, symbolized a larger truth. Seabees were combat engineers in the truest sense, combining industrial skill with battlefield effectiveness. But individual exploits were only the visible tip of a far larger operational impact. A single bulldozer could move 300 cubic meters of earth per hour, work that would have required 300 men with shovels laboring an entire day. Multiply that by dozens of machines and hundreds of skilled operators, and the productivity gap between American and Japanese construction became staggering. Japan's Setsuitai labor units, composed primarily of Korean and Taiwanese conscripts, worked under brutal conditions with hand tools. Roads, airfields, and fortifications took weeks or months, often unfinished, while Seabees completed the same work in days. Guadalcanal, 1942. Marines secured Henderson Field, but the Japanese had worked for it months. Within days, Seabee repaired and extended it, enabling continuous fighter operations. Espiritu Santo, a 6,000-foot airstrip carved from virgin jungle in 20 days. Vangunu Island, New Georgia. Seabees landed with Marines on June 30, 1943, and 9 days later, a fully functional fighter airstrip hosted the first aircraft. Tarawa, November 1943. The Japanese airfield, partially constructed over months, became operational under American control within 15 hours. Saipan, July 1944. Following 3 weeks of brutal fighting, the captured airfield supported B-29 bombers within 4 days. Tinian, August 1944. Seabees built 6 massive runways, each 8,500 feet long. 1 year later, these runways launched the atomic missions against Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Seabees worked even as combat continued. On Peleliu and Iwo Jima, bulldozers moved rubble, graded terrain, and built roads while enemy fire rained down. On Okinawa, Seabees transformed the island into a staging base for the planned invasion of Japan. Airfields, ports, fuel farms, and hospitals, all under ongoing combat conditions.
Captured documents revealed Japanese commanders were acutely aware of the disparity. Requests for heavy machinery went unfulfilled. They improvised where possible, scavenging materials or attempting manual workarounds, but nothing matched the productivity of bulldozers operated by skilled seabees. Even their expert cave and tunnel work could slow but never stop American operations. Seabees were older, experienced men. Average age early in the war was 37, far older than infantry. Their expertise mattered. Operating a bulldozer under fire, clearing coral and jungle, grading runways, or constructing fuel tanks required not just courage but professional skill. Yet the dangers were real. Bulldozer accidents, structural collapses, explosions, drowning, heat exhaustion, tropical disease. Approximately 500 seabees were killed in action, thousands more wounded, and hundreds died from construction accidents or disease. Decorations reflected both bravery and skill. Silver stars, Navy crosses, bronze stars, and thousands of Purple Hearts. The effect of seabee construction on Pacific strategy was profound. Islands became permanent bases, not temporary gains. Airfields, ports, roads, hospitals, fuel storage, and communication networks created operational continuity. Faster base development accelerated the campaign, shortened timelines, reduced casualties, and enabled sequential operations across vast distances. The seabees' work allowed island hopping to function logistically, a strategy impossible without rapid construction. The machines themselves were a product of American industrial power. Caterpillar produced tens of thousands of D8 bulldozers, ATRs, and other equipment. These were shipped thousands of miles across the Pacific, arriving reliably, maintained in theater, and replaced quickly when damaged. By contrast, Japan lacked the industrial capacity to produce or transport even a fraction of comparable machinery. The operational advantage was structural, not tactical. After the war, seabee equipment flooded civilian markets. Machines that had cleared jungle and built airfields now built highways, dams, and cities. The industrial lessons carried over into peacetime development. The war had demonstrated that control of construction and logistics is as decisive as firepower in modern conflict. The Pacific War was a war of islands, of logistics, of time. Victory was won not only with bullets and bombs, but with bulldozers, graders, and the skill of men who could fight and build simultaneously. Every cleared airfield, every graded road, every operational port was a statement of American industrial capacity transformed into battlefield advantage. Seabees were more than builders. They were force multipliers, turning temporary victories into permanent strategic advantage. They moved faster than the enemy could destroy, built where none had existed, and ensured that every American advance left behind a foundation stronger than any defensive line the Japanese could erect. In the end, the bulldozer was not just a machine, it was a weapon of war, a symbol of industrial power, and a decisive instrument in the American victory across the Pacific.
When the guns fell silent and the smoke of battle dissipated across the Pacific Islands, the work of victory was far from over. Bulldozers, graders, cranes, and countless pieces of construction equipment, the unsung weapons of war, rolled ashore with the seabees. Machines that had torn through coral, jungle, and sand now shaped the very foundations of American military power. Some of these machines even reached Japan itself, not as instruments of conquest, but as tools of reconstruction.
The very bulldozers that had helped defeat Imperial Japan now helped rebuild a defeated nation. Individual machines manufactured in the early 1940s remained operational in civilian applications for decades after the war, standing as enduring symbols of industrial durability and strategic foresight. The lesson of Pacific War bulldozers extends far beyond the individual machines or specific campaigns. It speaks to the fundamental nature of modern industrial warfare. Victory is not won solely by combat prowess or tactical brilliance. It is won by industrial capacity, by the ability to produce more equipment, move it where it is needed, maintain it under harsh conditions, and replace losses faster than the enemy can respond. This principle applied in the Pacific War to bulldozers, and it applies to military operations in any era. Even before the war, Japanese strategists understood the disparity. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, planner of Pearl Harbor, had studied American industrial capacity extensively. He had lived in the United States, observed its factories, and grasped the magnitude of production potential. He opposed war with the United States, warning that Japan could not win a prolonged industrial conflict against American factories, supply chains, and logistical networks. History proved him correct, but not in the way most imagined. It was not only battleships, aircraft, or rifles that defined victory. Sometimes it was a bulldozer, a steel blade, and a diesel engine that decided the pace of war. Bulldozers became visible symbols of American industrial might. Operating on contested islands, they moved earth at speeds Japanese manual labor could not match. They created operational bases where none had existed. They allowed American forces to maintain the tempo of war, to advance, resupply, and strike again before Japanese forces could react. Seabees and their machines became household names, celebrated in military publications, newsreels, and films like The Fighting Seabees, starring John Wayne. The men who operated these machines were not inexperienced soldiers learning on the fly. They were professional tradesmen, bulldozer operators, carpenters, welders, engineers, surveyors. Many were older than typical combat troops. Their expertise transformed raw jungle into functional airfields, ports, and supply depots with astounding speed. Aurelio Tassin on Treasury Islands was 38 years old when he crushed a Japanese pillbox with his bulldozer. His heroism reflected not luck, but professional skill applied under combat conditions. After the war, Seabee veterans and their machines reshaped the world. Bulldozers and heavy equipment entered civilian reconstruction, highway building, and industrial development. Techniques perfected in the Pacific, earth moving, grading, drainage, rapid construction, became central to post-war American infrastructure, from interstate highways to industrial complexes. Today, Caterpillar continues the D8 line with turbocharged engines, computerized controls, GPS guidance, and hydraulic systems. Operating weights now exceed 80,000 pounds, yet the core concept remains unchanged: steel blade, diesel power, earth-moving efficiency. Museums preserve wartime D8s as tangible artifacts of the Pacific War, honoring both the machines and the men who operated them. The strategic lesson of the Pacific War bulldozers is simple but profound. Wars are ultimately won by industrial systems, by the ability to convert production into operational capability faster than the enemy can respond. Fleet Admiral William Halsey recognized this when he ranked bulldozers fourth among all instruments of victory in the Pacific War. They were weapons, not because they fired bullets, but because they enabled every other weapon to function. Bulldozers built the runways that launched aircraft. They built the roads that carried supplies. They constructed the ports, fuel farms, hospitals, and communications infrastructure that sustained operations across thousands of miles of ocean. Without them, the island-hopping campaign would have been logistically impossible. The bulldozers of Treasury Islands, Saipan, Tinian, Okinawa, and beyond represented more than machines. They represented industrial might made tangible. They carried the knowledge and skill of trained operators, the vision of strategic planners, and the relentless determination of American military and civilian production systems. They built victory from the ground up, creating the essential infrastructure that made sustained success operationally possible. They were the silent, unglamorous heroes of the Pacific War, proving that true victory is built as much with steel, earth, and diesel engines as it is with courage and combat. Post-war intelligence reports, captured documents, and interrogations revealed Japanese awareness of the industrial capacity disparity. Vice Admiral Shigeru Fukudome wrote after the war that American construction capabilities were among the most significant factors contributing to Japan's defeat. Japanese attempts to destroy American construction equipment achieved only limited tactical success. While some bulldozers were damaged or destroyed in raids or artillery strikes, Americans maintained reserves, spare parts, and trained operators. A few losses could not slow operations because production and logistics ensured continuous availability. America produced thousands of bulldozers and crawler tractors during World War II. Caterpillar alone manufactured tens of thousands of machines, securing hundreds of millions in war contracts. Machines were shipped across the Pacific as routinely as rifles, ammunition, and food. Japan had no comparable industrial capacity, and even theoretical attempts to produce heavy equipment could not overcome logistical bottlenecks imposed by American submarine warfare. The combination of industrial output, logistics, and trained professional operators created an overwhelming productivity advantage for American forces. Seabees were a unique breed of military personnel. Many were older than typical soldiers, recruited for professional construction experience. The average age of early Seabee recruits was 37. They brought years of practical knowledge to the battlefield, operating bulldozers, graders, and other heavy equipment in combat zones. Training combined combat instruction with vocational education in construction skills. Camp Endicott in Rhode Island, Camp Peary in Virginia, and Port Hueneme in California provided intensive programs in equipment operation, welding, road building, concrete work, plumbing, electrical systems, surveying, drafting, and more. They were prepared to construct complete bases from raw jungle while defending themselves under fire. The combination of civilian expertise and military discipline created highly effective hybrid units. Seabee casualties reflected both combat and construction dangers. Approximately 500 Seabees were killed in action or died from combat wounds, with several thousand more wounded. Additional casualties resulted from construction accidents and tropical diseases. Decorations reflected the dual nature of their mission. 33 silver stars, 5 Navy crosses, hundreds of bronze stars, and thousands of Purple Hearts were awarded for gallantry, meritorious service, and professional excellence. Across the Pacific, Seabees built more than 400 bases of various sizes, constructed or repaired 100 airfields, and built thousands of miles of roads. They built port facilities where none had existed, dredging channels, constructing piers, and installing navigation aids. They built fuel storage systems, hospitals, communications networks, and power generation facilities. The scale and speed of their work consistently outpaced Japanese manual labor. Projects that took American bulldozers hours would require Japanese labor gangs days or weeks to complete. Japanese engineers demonstrated creativity in using local materials and constructing defensive positions, often modifying caves and tunnels into formidable fortifications. Yet these methods could not overcome the fundamental productivity gap. The speed and efficiency of American construction allowed forces to advance rapidly,